everybody, welcome to another edition of the Dollar Bin Bandits Wednesday episode. I am Joe Marcello.
I'm Aaron Phillips.
I'm Mike Farah.
And like I said, we are the Dollar Bin Bandits, and this is the Dollar Bin Bandits podcast. And you've made it this far, okay? It's Wednesday. Help us help you get through the rest of the week. And today, we're going to do so by presenting you our interview with Aaron Lopresti. He's had a great career. He's worked at Marvel and DC, and he's worked on some pretty recent work, specifically at DC doing New 52 work, which I am always in favor of, Green Lantern, the list goes on.
Yeah, he was a really nice guy to talk to. He's got his own projects going on as well. He has a comic coming out, Wraith of God, which sounds very interesting. And I think we'd have him back for talks about that because it's a very cool concept.
I missed out on this one, but I'm going to serve the Aaron Phillips role in saying that I loved hearing about an unsung character that probably nobody else wanted to hear about, which is Sludge, part of the Ultraverse from Malibu Comics in the 90s. I'm always a sucker for just a big, crazy monster. So I'm glad you guys asked about it. Thank you. And I can't wait to hear some of his remembrances of Sludge, like I'm sure we all are looking forward to. This is Aaron Lopresti.
How did you get into comics? And really, like, how did you get into the business as well?
You know, that's an excellent question. And it's funny, when I tell the story now, it didn't used to seem that unusual, but considering how long ago it was now, it's like, I tell people I got into the industry and they're like, what are you talking about? But I actually was in film school at USC, and it sort of dawned on me that I was, 120 miles from San Diego, and I had never gone to the world's biggest comic convention, right? So I did that, kind of got as a fan. And as I started to try and get into comics, it dawned on me that, hey, this is the place to go, show your portfolio, because there were all the publishers were there. Back in the old days, before the San Diego was in the big convention center, they were in this downtown, they didn't really call it a convention, like convention center, and it had two big rooms, the hallway through the middle and two big rooms. And in one room, all the publishers were set up. So in those days, this was the late 80s. It was, First Comics and Pacific Comics, along with Marvel and DC and Dark Horse and all these other publishers that were part of that sort of independent new wave that sort of hit in the 80s. And so there was a lot of people there to see your stuff. And so not really knowing the process, I actually wrote and illustrated a 22-page comic, Amazing Spider-Man story. Really, most people would do like 5 sample pages, right? But I did the whole freaking story. And it just so happened that Terry Cavanaugh was working the booth and that day at San Diego, and he was the editor on Marvel Comics Presents, which, as you recall, those of you old enough, recall was the, sorry, my dog is always letting us know that he's here.
Not a problem.
They did this anthology book that came out weekly. So they were doing 3 stories, usually one Wolverine story, then 2 other short stories to back it up. But they needed material like crazy because, like I said, it was a weekly book and an anthology book. So I showed him my samples and he liked them enough. And he said, what was the exact wording he used? I believe it was, I might be able to use you sometime. Okay, which I took as you're hired. And so back in those days, we had no internet at that point, right? So I would have to call him up on the phone, and I would call Marvel and say, can I speak to Terry Cavanaugh? And 9 times out of 10, you'd get his answering machine right. Every once in a while, they'd pick up, and then they'd wish they hadn't because they realized it was somebody begging for work. But I would leave messages and say, hey, remember, this is Aaron Lopresti. We talked about this and blah, 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 and nothing, right? So I finally saved up enough money. And at this time I was out of film school and I had moved back to Portland, Oregon, and I was working in a commercial arts studio. The film thing didn't really work out, and that's another story. But so I was working in a commercial arts studio with the grand designs of getting into comics, which I had always wanted to do since I was a kid. And so I saved up my money, and then like every 6 months I would go back to New York and try to get into Marvel, try to get into DC and show my portfolio. And I got in good with the receptionist at Marvel. And so when I would come in there, she would just buzz me in, even though I didn't have an appointment, right? So you got all these people sitting in the lobby waiting with their portfolios. I'd come in, hey, we talk a little bit, and then she'd buzz me in, and I'd go in without an appointment, right? And I would just wander around in Marvel waiting to see an editor's door that was open, and then I would go and bug them, and then they would be like, you know, how'd you get in here, and blah, blah, blah. And so, but I found Terry Kavanaugh, and I basically started pressuring him and saying, hey, we met at San Diego last year, and you said this and that and the other thing. And finally he caved and gave me a one story in Marvel Comics Presents that I just did a really horrible job on. You know, it was my very first job, and I thought it was great, and I thought I made it, right? I'm in, you know, and then the just process started all over again and never heard anything. And I had to go back. And so I was making these trips about every 6 months, you know, to save up the money to go to New York for a week. And eventually made enough contacts at Marvel that I got a Submariner inventory story, and then started doing some What the Stories, which were the humor book, their parody book of their own characters. And I was writing and penciling and inking these little shorts, you know, every other issue or something like that with Forbish Man. And then when I would go and turn those in, of course, then I'd try and get work, you know, and pick up things here and there. And I wasn't really getting any traction. And I had suddenly immediately got pigeonholed as a humor artist, right? And so no one was really taking me seriously. And Renee Witterstatter, who was the editor on the What the comic, she was close friends with Michael Golden, who at the time was the art director over at DC. And so she introduced me to Michael, and then Michael sort of, you know, that this 1 week I was there sort of took me under his wing, and I asked him a ton of questions. He was finally able to sort of part the cloud of ignorance that I had, that I wasn't really understanding why my stuff wasn't working like I thought it should be working, you know? And he was the first guy that was able to sort of translate it to me and say, well, you think you're doing this, but you really need to be doing this. You think this looks dynamic, but it really doesn't. This is what dynamics are, you know. You think your storytelling is really good here, but it really isn't. And this is how. And he explained all this to me, and it just like clicked. It was like, you know, it was like the parting of the clouds, you know, and the sunshine came through. And so I was there. I came in the middle of the week, stayed over a weekend, and then I was there for like the middle of the next week. So that weekend, I did a 3-page sample story based on everything that Michael had told me to do. And it was kind of it was a Wolverine Hulk story thing, you know, a lot of action, and, you know, and I took it in. Renee took me in on Monday. I showed it to Danny Fingeroth, who just at that time was the Spider-Man editor. And that's when they were doing the bi-weekly stuff. And so they needed backup stories, because Mark Bagley was, you know, killing himself doing these, you know, the stories, but I think they were only like 16-page stories. They need like a 6-page backup to fill out every issue, because they were doing it bi-weekly, right? And so I got a couple of those, tanked them. Danny didn't want to use me anymore. I begged him to give me another shot, and then I would do some more samples, and then he would look at it and go, okay, yeah, this is better, okay. And then finally I got some stuff going at Marvel. And so that's basically how I broke in the long and short of it.
Nice. That's a pretty interesting, you know, it's a pretty interesting, you know, way of getting to it, because we've heard so many varying stories about people get into this line of work. And I always love asking this question, because it is, I guess, somewhat low-hanging fruit in that sense, but everyone has such great stories and how they do that. And it's like, you know, I went up to Marvel, and these were back in the days where people like just walk into the offices and they're like, hey, I would like to see so-and-so, or, you know, now it's, you got a fingerprint and, you know, retinal scan just to get in the building and all that sort of thing. But these are, I love hearing these stories.
Well, it was fun because I was at the tail end sort of old school Marvel, you know, when I was breaking in. It was just before, you know, the early 90s when Image exploded and all these things happened. So it was sort of everything about Marvel was still the way that you would have imagined it from the 70s and 80s, right? Mm-hmm. And so, you know, being there and oftentimes, like I said, before I got to know Renee Witterstatter and she would get me in, you know, I was basically sneaking in with the help of the receptionist. And, you know, and walking around, and you're just sort of, as a young artist, you're just in awe of the situation. You know, you're walking around, and the way Marvel was set up was they had sort of this kind of bullpen area in the middle of the office that was drafting tables and stuff like that, where they could do production art. And if someone like an artist came in and they needed them to touch up something, there was tables in there they could work. And then all the offices sort of were around the outer edges, and they all sort of faced, you know, they'd have a window out to the street, but then they would face this inner area where the, mm-hmm. you know, the drafting tables and stuff were. And
you
so
just feel the eyes on you.
Yeah, it was
from all directions.
Incredible feeling, because you're like, oh, you know, you know, there's Mike Rockowitz, and there's, you know, there's Bob Harris, and there's, you know, Tom DeFalco, and, you know, whoever else. And you knew you weren't supposed to be in there, but you felt like this is how it was done. You know, this is the story where the guy who sneaks in and kept at it, and finally, you know, they gave him a break. And that's sort of what happened with me. And you can't, like you said, you can't do that anymore. You know, and people ask me, how do you break into comics? And I go, that's a good question. I go, normally I would do a sample story, show your portfolio at a convention, but I don't really think that's the way to do it anymore. It seems like editors find people online, and it's just a totally different, you know, we were mailing in samples to editors and praying to God that they would actually open the package and look at the samples, you know? So you do drawings on the outside of the package, anything to get their attention, to get them to sort of like open up your samples and look at them, and make phone calls. And then if someone called you back, and heaven forbid you weren't home, right? And then you missed the call, you know, and so
your career's over.
No. Yeah, exactly. It was crazy.
I just want to know, I know you jumped over to Malibu for a little bit. Was that you going to them, or is them coming to you saying, would you like to come do some work for us?
They came to me initially, and I was just doing I met Dave Ulbrich and Tom Mason at Dragon Con in Atlanta one year. And I had just, Spider-Man 365, the hologram cover had just come out, and I had done the origin story, like a 10-page origin story in there. And so I remember I was sitting next to Bagley, and we were, you know, signing books. He was signing, you know, hundreds of books. I was signing 3. But, you know, occasionally I would get someone come up, and they came up, Dave and Tom came up, and they didn't really sell Malibu on me at that point. I think they just said, hey, you want to do a couple covers for Dinosaurs for Hire? And we've got some other stuff coming up that we'd be interested in talking to you about. And I'm like, yeah, sure. Well, I was at Marvel, and I felt like I was, you know, doing well at Marvel. So it was kind of like, it wasn't something that I was really thinking about doing, but I got offered She-Hulk. And in honesty, I wasn't ready, but I got offered it. And so I was planning to do She-Hulk. And then John Romita Sr., the art director, stepped in and said, no, this guy's not ready for a regular book. You need to give it to somebody else. And so that kind of ticked me off, even though now looking back, he was right. But it wasn't like they said, okay, well, we're not going to have you do She-Hulk, but you can do this. You can like do these 3 issues of Quasar or something. They didn't throw anything else at me. I was talking to Nell Yomtov about doing a Hawkeye miniseries, but it wasn't set in stone, right? And at that point, I was making, I think $80 a page for pencils, right? And so then I get this call from, I can't remember if it was Chris Ulm or Dave Ulbrich. Somebody called me, and they're getting ready to launch the Ultraverse. And they asked me if I, you know, wanted to do one of the books, one of the lead books. They wanted me to do Hardcase. And I was like, well, I don't know, you know, I'm at Marvel and blah, blah, blah. But they said, well, we can pay you $135 a page. Okay. So that's $50, $60 more than I was making at Marvel, almost doubled my page rate. And I'm like, heck yeah, I'm doing it. And that was it, you know, because I was still a little ticked off about the whole She-Hulk thing. And I wasn't really sure what my future was at Marvel. I think if I had stayed at Marvel, I could have, you know, I would have picked up things here and there, and maybe eventually, you know, I had grown into something. But you know, when they're offering you almost double the money and you just got snubbed on a book that you thought you were going to get. You know, my attitude was right. And so I took, and that was the first, I thought with that kind of money, I could actually quit doing commercial art, which I was working in a commercial art studio in Portland at the time, and I could just do comics full time. And so I jumped at the chance to do that. And I went to a show in New York when they were, Ultraverse was, this had to have been like maybe March, you know, somewhere in that neighborhood, February or March. And the Malibu had their big booth set up, and they were previewing all their stuff. And I was over there talking to the guys, and I didn't really want to do hard case because the design of the character and the whole thing of, you know, him being a movie star, and it just didn't really appeal to me that much. But I was like, you know, it's a job, right? But then I started looking through their book of characters that were kind of in their second wave. And I saw that Kevin Nolan designed for Sludge. And I was like, I went up to Chris Holman and I said, dude, I'm sorry, but I got to do this. This is what I have to do. And he's like, man, we really need you to launch your hard case. And I'm like, look, what if I do the first 3 issues and then jump on this? Because they weren't going to release Sludge till October. And this was, like I said, you know, February, March or something. And I could have started on hard case right then. And he's like, no, I really don't want to do that. And I go, dude, look, I'm sorry, but I got to do this. And so he was like, all right, we'll find somebody else. Fine, you can do Sludge. And the funny thing is, those first couple books that launched, Prime, Strangers, and Hard Case, sold extremely well out of the gate, right? So I really screwed myself over on a big royalty by not doing Hard Case. I did okay with Sludge, but at that point, the boom was starting to curve down, you know, when that book came out. And so it didn't sell anywhere near as much as we'd hoped it would. But still, I'm glad I did it, because that was definitely the book for me. And it allowed me to sort of be creative in a way I hadn't been before. The great thing about Malibu was they did not, when I was at Marvel, I just felt just a ton of pressure, you know, because you're at Marvel and you're trying to please everybody. You don't want it to be your next job, be your last job. You're trying to figure out ways, how can I be great? And as a result, I did some of my worst work, you know, because I had this just enormous pressure on myself. When I was at Malibu, there was no pressure, right? They said, just, you know, be you, do what you want to do. And I did. And the Sludge was probably the first, what I would consider professional work that I did. It's certainly not the best work I've ever done in my life, but it was at least professional, right? And so it was a really big stepping stone for me artistically to take that opportunity, even though maybe it might have backfired a little bit on me after they went under and me trying to get back into the mainstream. But
what was it about Sludge that appealed to you as opposed to, you know, the other books that were being offered? Well,
I grew up in the 70s, right? And so my big influences, or the guys I really gravitated to, were guys like Frazetta, and then after Frazetta, Wrightson. Mm-hmm. And so I was a big monster guy for whatever reason. Even as a kid, I liked monster movies, and so I was a huge Wrightson fan. I mean, I was just out of my mind over Wrightson. And you know, I liked Plug, and all these guys were doing fantasy and monster stuff. They weren't doing superhero books. And even though I read superhero books, as a big Spider-Man fan, Captain America, Avengers, all that kind of stuff, I found myself as an artist gravitating towards the monsters and the fantasy type stuff, because I looked at guys like Wrightson and Barry Smith, and the only other guy that wasn't, Neil Adams, of course, did tremendous detail work on superhero stuff, and I was a big fan of his. But most of the guys I was looking at and admiring, you know, Wrightson, Smith, Frazetta, these were guys that did limited comic book work and then tried to kind of spin off their careers into turning comic art into fine art, right? So they were doing portfolios and prints and books and illustration and all this really cool stuff. And I kind of envisioned myself in that role as a kid growing up and being that. And so I always equated like fantasy, barbarian, monster stuff as stuff where you could really go in and do detailed illustrative work. And superhero stuff was something else. It was more, there was kind of a standard formula for that. And so I always felt like, not just as a fan of monster stuff, which I am, but as a fan or as an artist wanting to ultimately be considered an illustrator, right? Not a cartoonist. I felt like those genres were ones that it was easiest to do that type of work in. And so that's why, it was the whole Swamp Thing and all that kind of stuff, as a kid that I loved. And then suddenly you see Sludge and you go, oh my gosh, this is my chance to do what Wrightson did, basically. And so that was sort of the what pulled me into it.
I think so.
So you've during your time at DC, you've worked on a lot of great titles, and what I love about your work is that it's very current. Like it's, and I say that because a lot of the people that we've spoken to over the past year or so, we're discussing work that they did 20, 30 years ago. Right. And, you have worked on stuff that I've read a couple months ago, recent stuff. And some of the things that, that I really love that you worked on is the Tales from the Dark Multiverse.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, that was so cool. So cool.
That's one of the best jobs I've ever done. And I set out with the single purpose to make it one of the best jobs I've ever done. And because there's two ways you approach a story. One is, and unfortunately, most of the time it's you approach it with a deadline in mind, right? You go, especially if it's a monthly book, you do the best you can with the 20 days you have or 28 days you have to do the issue. You do the very best you can, but it doesn't mean that you can do your very best, right? And so when I got that Tales from the Dark Multiverse, I knew there was going to be prestige format. I knew it was going to be a bigger book. And I thought, I said, this is the only prestige format book I've ever done in my life. And I said, I am not going to treat this just like it's a monthly book. And I spent an exorbitant amount of time figuring out the storytelling, thematically what I wanted to do with the characters, with lighting and shadow and things like that. And I've actually done a couple videos on the storytelling approach I used on that comic on my YouTube channel. There's a couple other things like my Garbage Man stuff I put a lot of thought into, but I had a lot of time to work on it. There was no deadlines on that, right? So I was able to do that. I had an extended deadline on the Dark Multiverse thing. So it gave me a little bit of time to really sort of think about not just doing it, but doing it a certain way. And so, yeah, I was really pleased for the most part of how that book came out. And I'm glad you
very much so. Very much so. It was, I've been suffering, like I think a lot of comic book readers suffering from event fatigue because there's just one major event after another. And, after a while, I'm like, yeah, okay, I guess this is something. But when that Dark Multiverse stuff came up, what I loved about it, I mean, the artwork was just so, it was, I don't want to say graphic in a negative way, but it was, it was more grown up than some of your standard, superhero art that you would see. And, that taking consideration, you're flipping a story of like Infinite Crisis, on its side and really toying with it. And you have the Joker, the Batman who laughs, and, it's everything was just banging on all cylinders. And it was awesome. But also the work you did on Earth 2, Green Lantern, like the artwork in there was just absolutely fantastic. But I want to ask specifically about your time on Wonder Woman. I know it was a long roundabout way of getting to that, but I just wanted to tell you how much I enjoyed your work on that other stuff too. So
thank you. I appreciate it.
You had a pretty extensive run on Wonder Woman and working with Gail Simone. What was that experience like?
Well, it was when I was I left Marvel and went over to DC, and I was originally going to do Power Girl, and the one that Amanda Conner ended up doing. And then Terry Dodson left Wonder Woman. And so then they were looking for a Wonder Woman artist. And Mike Martz, who was not the editor on the book, but I'd known, worked with him for years at Marvel on X-Men stuff and different things. And so he was at DC, and he said, well, what about Aaron? And they're like, oh, yeah, what about Aaron? And so they contacted me and said, hey, do you want to do Wonder Woman? And I said, I get the idea, the appeal of doing Wonder Woman, but I said, Terry and I are pretty good friends, and I didn't want it to look sort of like nepotism or some kind of weird thing where, Terry leaves Wonder Woman and here comes Aaron to pick up the pieces, and it was like, I didn't want that sort of association where like, oh, Terry left, but he got Aaron the job kind of thing. Or, here's Aaron trying to be Terry, or, because, we spent a lot of time going to conventions together. We shared a booth at San Diego, and it was just, I just felt like, I don't know if I want to do that. And the funny thing is, Power Girl ended up being way more popular than Wonder Woman did. So once again, but I remember Mike Martz calling me up and going, dude, you have the opportunity to work on one of the Trinity, one of the big three. Don't be stupid, take it. And I'm like, yeah, okay, you're right. And so then I ended up taking it. And I didn't know Gail until I started working with her on that. And I didn't know anything about Wonder Woman other than you might superficially know about Wonder Woman, because I never read Wonder Woman when I was a kid, and I never kept up with it as an adult other than just, I saw when Deodato was doing Wonder Woman, and had the hair and everything. And,
right.
People, Adam Hughes doing Wonder Woman stuff or whatever, but I didn't really read a lot of it. I was completely unfamiliar with the character. And so I remember getting on there and getting the scripts, and I was like, who is this? Who is this? Who is this? And I remember the first thing I did was I called Terry, and I go, Terry, who is this? And he's like, I don't know. And I'm like, thanks for nothing, and so I was basically, I would contact Gail, and I'd be like, Gail, I don't know who these characters are, or I'd talk to my editor, who's Matt Idelson. I mean, Matt, I need a lot of help here because I don't know who these characters are and stuff. And so I do this like, super quick learning curve on Wonder Woman. But thankfully what Gail did was she talked to me about stuff I wanted to do, and which is always dangerous because I always say the same thing. I always say, well, either barbarians or dinosaurs or something like that, and so she wrote this kind of fantastic, our first story arc was this, brought in the 70s DC barbarian characters, Beowulf, the Stalker, Claw, and worked them into this kind of just bizarre, but really cool barbarian story arc. So I could kind of get my feet wet with Wonder Woman without really having to deal with modern Wonder Woman. I had time to kind of get caught up on all that stuff. I went back and read issues and things like that to kind of get an idea. So then by the time we got out of that story arc and we were, into the current DCU, I had a better grasp of who Wonder Woman was, and, the island, Themyscira, and, Hippolyta, and all these other characters that, I had no idea who they were. And so, and Gail was just always really terrific. She was always very accommodating. And, I had great experience working with her on that book. It was a lot of fun, but she got stuck with having to do some stuff, which always happens, of having to incorporate concepts that wasn't her original intent for stories, because they had to tie into something bigger. Oh, right. Okay. And that always happens. Like you got this plan in this series, and we're going to go from here to here. And then someone comes in and says, oh, we're doing this big crossover and Wonder Woman's going to be involved in it. So you have to bring these characters in. And you're like, well, these characters don't fit into my story. So you have to rework everything. So I don't think and I don't mean to speak for her, but I don't think she got to do everything the way she exactly wanted to do it on some of the stuff. But we still had a really good time, and some really good stories. And it did a lot. It did a lot for me, just recognition wise, right? In terms of people being able to attach me to something.
Yeah, I think that was like 2008-ish, 10.
Yeah.
So were you contending with the, because I believe they had like Infinite Crisis or Countdown or one of those other events happening simultaneously or around that time. So were you contending with trying to fit the continuity into that at all?
It was Rise of the Olympians. There was something that Jeff Johns was doing. I thought it was Rise of the Olympians. And I think that's what integrated its way into, because I think Gail, we did the Barbarian story arc, and then we did the, what was the villain with the spikes on her eyes and the red hair that, really beat the crap out of Wonder Woman. Oh gosh, what was her name? We had that storyline. I can't think of the character's name. It was really kind of a violent and sort of brutal story arc. And when that concluded, that's when she had to start working in this kind of Rise of the Olympians type stuff, and kind of went, I don't know if that, like I said, that was originally what she had planned to do, but I still think she did a really good job of making it work. But I think that's what was going on, but it wasn't so much me being involved in that as it was what Gail had to deal with as writing the stuff. I would just get the script and go, okay, so.
When did you think professionally you found, I hate to say your voice, but your confidence as an artist, that this is my style, this is how I'm going to do, my art, because I know you said at Marvel, it was a little bumpy to begin with. Was it Malibu that you started to really feel confident in what you were doing?
Yeah, I did, but the confidence waned quickly. And here's what happens is I kind of got into this, I was doing Sludge, and it was more of a kind of a Wrightson-esque, approach. And I had made the Wizard Magazine used to do this thing called 8 to the 4, right? They'd pick 8 artists and to keep your eye on. And I made that group based on what I was doing on Sludge, so I felt pretty good about what I was doing. But then when Malibu went under, the mistake I made was I stayed at Malibu too long, instead of, when I was rolling, jumping off and, getting something else going, I stayed with them because I liked the guys at Malibu so much, and I liked the work environment, that I didn't want to screw them over and say, I'm out of here, guys. Sorry, you guys are, I know you guys are going to be sold in 3 months, and I'm not, I got to get out of here while I can. And so when they went under, I was like kind of scrambling, trying, okay, well, I was, knocking on the doors over at Valiant and DC and Marvel, trying to get anybody's attention I could. And I picked up a few issues of, Solar at Valiant, but I didn't really want to do it. I just was looking to stay afloat. And then DC came up with, a couple of fill-in issues on Robin, and I did those, but I did those at the same time I was doing Valiant, so I was kind of not giving either one of them the proper amount of attention. And so I didn't do a particularly good job on either one of them. And so it didn't really help me, for my next job kind of thing. And so I was bouncing around quite a bit. And when that happens, you start thinking, okay, maybe what I'm doing isn't grabbing people's attention the way it needs to be. So then you start reevaluating. You're like, how can I change my style? What can I do? And, what I found out was that I just needed to get better. And I quit trying to say, well, I need to look like Kevin Nolan, or I need to look like Travis Charest, or I need to look like Jim Lee, or I need to look like Dale Keown. It was, I've got to get better, And so my focus was always trying to get better, doing what I was comfortable doing. And it took a long time, probably, or maybe I'm getting ahead of your questions here, but probably not until I was at CrossGen that everything finally came together for me in a way that I had really solidified my look of what I was doing, my confidence and how I was able to do it. And so that first third of my career, you know, up to about 2001 or two, whenever I went over to Malibu or CrossGen, I was just scrambling all the time, trying to make my stuff look better. How could I make it look more current? How could I make it look more interesting to editors? What, you know, because I do have sort of a old school 70s flair to my work, but it's, someone had described it really well. I wish I could remember the terminology he used, but it was like basically saying that I'm this interesting combination of 70s and modern or current, right? You can see the 70s influence, but it's not like I'm not caught in a time warp. I am accessible to the modern audience, but you can still see that sort of old school mentality in there that I grew up with. So it wasn't probably until CrossGen where I really, again, was put in a situation where I was able to do whatever I wanted, just do it well. And then I really started experimenting again and figuring out how I really got an anchor in Matt Ryan that I really, really liked his stuff. And it was the first time I'd had somebody other than Danny Mickey, but Danny Mickey and I worked together very sporadically because he was always on big projects and I never was. But Matt Ryan was like, he inked stuff the way I would ink it, except with better control and better patience. And so we really, really clicked. And that's sort of, I think, where I found myself finally. And when I left CrossGen, I actually had Marvel interested in me as opposed to me begging Marvel for a job. So
makes sense.
Oh, there we go. Sorry, I don't unmute. I want you touched on your style, and that was actually going to be one of my next questions, is because I think your style certainly lends itself to, like, the work you did on Wonder Woman really just kind of fit that character. Mm-hmm. But it also, it changes a bit. I think, like, I think about the work that you did on Green Lantern, which is one of my favorite characters. And do you purposely, and I know, as you said, your goal to, get better and whatnot, but do you, like, if you're going to work on a particular character, Wonder Woman versus Green Lantern versus any other character, are you trying to bring any different elements into it? Because there are some artists, their style is their style, like Jim Lee, like, okay, doesn't matter who he's drawing, that's Jim Lee. But there are others who kind of tweak it a bit. Is that your goal, or, how do you approach your characters?
I don't think so. I mean, I'm doing that with the current project I'm working on right now. Is the first time I've really sort of strayed from what I've done my entire career. My approach was always, again, not necessarily changing a style, but get better, get better. And if that meant incorporating things from, a variety of different sources, maybe, I like the way Adam Hughes does that, so I'm going to take that. I like the way Travis does that, so I'm going to take that. Dale Keown did this really well, I'm going to take that. Kevin Nolan does this really well, so I'm going to take a piece of that. And so, Neil Adams does this, and I'm going to take some of that. And so it was always, if I got, like, for example, if when I was doing Wonder Woman, I was like, how should I do her hair? Because you have some people that go in there and draw every strand of hair, right? And I didn't really like that look. I liked Frazetta's look on hair, where he would just use large areas of black to create this volume and the sheen on the hair. And it felt more organic and natural to me than going in and drawing every single line, which is a stylistic approach, but it's not something that I really sort of gravitated to. So then I would think, well, maybe I want to kind of go in and make, like, I always, if you'll notice, any of my female characters in any of the books, or Ms. Marvel, whatever, their hair is always moving. There's never a panel where it's just laying there. It's always flowing in some regard. And
I'm
I was
glad-
always using that.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I wanted to say this because my wife brought up the hair from Wonder Woman. My wife who doesn't, she is only into comics because she's maybe sitting next to me, so she doesn't know really anything about this stuff, but she saw the work you did on Wonder Woman once a while back. And I remember her distinctly making that comment, very similar to what you just said, because of the style of her hair. She was like, wow, that looks really nice. I wish I had that hair. Of course, to which I said, I wish I had any hair.
Yeah,
so
I know.
I don't,
that's my complaint.
There you go. But I'm sorry.
But yeah,
please.
so those were things that, like the face, I would try, and my approach to the face was, I just need to draw this face better. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean more realistic? Does it mean more expressive? All those things, right? But when you talk about things like the hair, to me I wanted to kind of treat it as a design element. And so I always have movement in the hair and curly cues and things like that. And maybe some of that was a little, Line Decker influence, or maybe some Art Nouveau influence, or something like that. But in terms of doing specific stylized approach, I was probably a little different on the Garbage Man stuff because it was a monster book. But when I was doing superhero stuff, regardless of if it was, the Avengers, X-Men, Wonder Woman, New 52, Justice League, I kind of approached all that the same way, just trying to do it better than the last time I did it. And sometimes I think I was successful at that. Sometimes I wasn't. And anytime you're on a monthly book where you're doing 12, 14 issue run, 16 issue, whatever it is, year and a half, 2 years run, you're going to have some issues that are really, really good, and other ones that maybe didn't work as well. Or you got some pages and that one sucked, but this page is really, really nice. So there's always some of that in there. It's inevitable, but I was always attempting to improve, whether that was a conscious attempt to change stylistically or just kind of figure out ways to do things better, or that I would view as being better, I guess.
You mentioned New 52, and I want to get your thoughts on how they approached you with it and what your thoughts are of the overall basis of it.
Well, I was good friends with Dan DiDio, and, but we didn't really sit around and talk about stories and directions and things like that because I wasn't writing, except when I was writing, And then, so I was always coming in after the fact, generally speaking. And what happened when they wanted to move me off Wonder Woman onto something else, because that is sort of, that's been the modern trend for the last, 20 years is to, be on a series for a year and a half, move on to something else. And that may be sort of the wall that publishers have put up so that they don't have another Image thing happen where Jim Lee is X-Men, and Dale Keown is Hulk. It's like, no, we want to diminish the importance of the artists and the writers on these projects. So we won't let them on there long enough so that they can take over the character, basically. But so they came to me and they said, "Oh, we want you to move on." I'm like, "Well, to what?" And they were going to give me Superman, which I was very excited about but I had learned at that point to ask questions and not just say, "Yeah, heck, I'll do it." So I asked, "Well, what are you doing with the book? Who's writing?" And Straczynski was writing, and I'm not, I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm not a huge Straczynski fan because I think he does TV writing in comic books, which I find to be stretched out too long many times, and doesn't move as quickly and as action packed as I would like as an artist. And so I found out he was working on the book. So that was kind of a red flag for me. And I said, "Well, okay, what's the story?" And they're like, "Well, it's Clark Kent walks across America." And I was like, "You are offering me Superman and that's what you're going to give me?" I said, "There's no way I'm doing that." I said, "Because I'm going to be on Superman for a year. This book is going to tank because no one wants to read it. because no one cares about Clark Kent walking across America. And I'm going to be the artist that's attached to that, and my career's over. I said, no. And so they had to find something else for me, because they had just signed me to a contract from, steal me from Marvel to do Wonder Woman. And then, so they had to find something for me. So they said, okay, well, we're doing this Justice League International book, right? And it was a big miniseries. It was like 24 issues. And Judd Winnick was writing. And it was coming out, I want to say every 2 weeks or something, or it was, the issues were king sized. I can't remember exactly what it was, but they had like 3 artists working on it. And they said, well, you're going to be the main guy. And they said, which issues do you want to do? And, I said, picked out the stories. Oh, I want the Metal Men and I want this one. And, so I did like an issue every like 4 issues or 5 issues, something like that. And so we did this thing, and it was a big hit, right? Because it had Captain Atom in it, had the Blue Beetle, it had, all these characters that people, fondly remember from. Yeah.
It was
like
very funny.
Yeah, when McGuire was doing it, right?
Yeah.
And those guys. And so they decided they wanted to do it as a New 52 title. And so they said, okay, we're going to spin this off. Dan Jurgens is going to write it, and, you draw it. And I went, sounds good to me. And so that was, I knew they were relaunching the New 52. I knew what the plans were, right? Because they'd send out diagrams and, Superman's going to look like this and Batman's going to look like this. And this is this whole new thing to get attention on the line. And, and so I knew what was going on, but the Justice League book was really kind of an outlier. It didn't really, Batman was in it, and which never made sense to me, the Batman to ever be in any team at all. Not even Justice League. I know why they put him in there, but he makes no sense for the character to be in a team book. But so he was sort of in it, kind of as the watchdog. And so that was a surprise hit as well. I think the first issue sold over 60,000 copies, and I don't think they expected it. And it's funny to say 60,000, what a success. But, the way the market is, that it was. And I had done at that point store signings before, almost exclusively to zero audience. You go to a store signing and you're sitting there and going, well, at least I'm getting free pizza, because no one shows up, because no one cares, right? And so I set this up to do a store signing for the launch of Justice League. And I felt like Frank Miller. I had a line out the door at a store here in town all night. It was incredible. Right. And so it was a very popular book. The characters were very popular. And, but someone up in the upper echelon at DC didn't like the book, or not that we were doing a bad job on the book, but didn't like the concept. Right. And they had this big Jim Lee, Jeff Johns Justice League, which was like their main focus. And David Finch was supposed to be doing a new Justice League book. And they're like, we got too much Justice League. We need to dump this title. And Jurgens and myself both went to Dan DiDio and said, Dan, look, if you don't want to do this is Justice League book, just have them get, let's have something happen so the Justice League won't have anything to do with them. And they're like this rogue team, and we'll just keep doing the book. Because even then, after it was still selling over 40,000, right? So it was doing well. And I was like, you don't cancel a book that's doing well. Mm-hmm. I said, just give us, some leeway here so we're not a Justice League book anymore. And that solves your problem, and it allows us to keep doing the book. But he didn't do it. And so the book got canceled, which then the way the New 52 was set up put me into a bit of a tailspin, because the way the New 52 was set up was, they had the big launch with all their main characters, right? And they had 52 books, right? And then they would take the last 3 or 4, whatever they were, that weren't doing well, and they'd cancel those and reintroduce 3 or 4 more new titles to complete the 52 and see how long those went. And then whatever was bad, they would dump, and they'd keep this process going. The problem is, if you launch with all your big guns, who do you got left, right? You got second tier characters. Then you got third tier characters. Then you got fourth tier characters, right? So this book should have never been canceled due to sales, but it was. So now I'm thrown out of the loop, right? I can't just go take over Batman or Superman or whatever because someone else is doing that, right? So those books weren't available. So it's kind of like, well, what are the next 4 books we're bringing in? You know, and they said, it was Amethyst, right? And I went, you've got to be freaking kidding me. He said, this book, and Christy Marks, who wrote it, did a fantastic job. This is not a commentary on the work she did. That was actually a really good series if anybody read it.
I did,
nobody
yeah.
read it, right? And I knew no one was going to read it. And I said, this book is going to get canceled before we even get to 12 issues. And it was. But I did take on the challenge of doing it, and really, it was really hard because I was designing everything from scratch, and it was a whole new world, and every page was, oh, now we're going to go someplace we've never seen before. So there was no reference for me to pull. I had to create it. So it was a really hard job. And I think for the most part, it turned out really, really good, but it was a sales disaster, not only because they didn't launch it as its own book, but they launched it as an anthology called Sword of Sorcery featuring Amethyst.
Mm-hmm.
So now you've got a character that's not that popular, and you're sticking them in an anthology book that's now $1 more than the regular comics. So now you're asking people to spend money on a character more money on a character they don't care about anyway. So the whole thing was, I was like, Dan, what are you doing to me, man, to the deal? And so anyway, but when that book got canceled, then that's when I just started bouncing all over the place at DC, and no one can keep track of where I was because I was always someplace different every 3 months, it seemed like, because there wasn't, the titles weren't available to be had, so it was always, well, what can we get Aaron? Oh, let's do 3 issues of Death of Hawkman, or then let's go do Damage, and let's go do this and that, so I worked on a lot of books that a lot of people frankly didn't see and didn't read. So
something you mentioned at the start was, that they don't want to keep someone on a book too long. Like you said, with the issue that they had with Jim Lee and Neil Keown,
mm-hmm.
You had the opportunity to have a 10-year run on a book. Do you think that'd be something you'd be interested in, or do you like working on so many different things?
Well, okay. If the situation was that, I love the writer, I love the direction we were going, I love doing, there is a nice sense of comfortability working on the same thing and getting to know it, and getting to know the character and getting to understand the character. And like I had mentioned Damage previously, that was a book they brought me in on. It was tanking, and it was part of that new Heroes launch. And I took it, but Robert Venditti was writing, who's a very good writer, and I really loved working on that book. And we did about, I think I started on issue 9. I think I went through 14 or 15, maybe, I don't know, 16, somewhere in there. I did like 9 issues, I think, of it. And I was really getting into it and really enjoyed I was understanding the character, what we could do visually, things like that. And the stories were great because Robert and I would always talk about what we was going to do. And I would have enjoyed working on that book if it had sold, but it just didn't. And so it ended up getting canceled. And the thing that ticked me off about that project was that I was like, why didn't you bring me in on this from the beginning? Now, I think I was either working on Conan, Wonder Woman, or with Gale, or which I really wanted to do, or possibly the Herculoids, which I also really wanted to do. So I might have been involved in one of those when that thing launched. But they launched those books with, I think Tony Daniel launched the book, but they launched this with these guys, most of these guys, with the intent of them doing the first 3 issues and then bailing, right? And I'm like, that's not a way to create longevity in a series. So, Tony Daniel did the first 3 issues, and then Carrie Nord did an issue or 2, which I thought was really good. I love Carrie's stuff, but they didn't like it for the book, that the style he was working in for the book, although I don't know, I thought it was really cool. So I was like, and then they brought in another guy who was, I want to say Brazilian or maybe South American, someplace in there. So there was like this language barrier, right? So and all these books were set up Marvel style. And then by that, I mean, they were plot. And then we were, as the artists, we were interpreting the story and expanding it and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And so there was a real communication problem, I guess, with him understanding what he needed to do. And so I basically came in as the fourth artist on this series after only 9 issues, right? So it wasn't a good situation from that regard. But that, to answer your question in a long about way, yeah, I would be, if it was something, if someone said, hey, Aaron, you want to do Spider-Man, and then, you do it for 6 years and you like, what they're doing with the character, or, Superman, or, Batman, whatever the character might be. You can get into a groove being on the same book all the time. And I think it's important career-wise, because I think you do much better in this industry if people can associate you with something. Oh yeah, you're the Wonder Woman artist. Oh, you're the Batman artist. Oh yeah, because a lot of people, I had huge fan base when I was drawing Wonder Woman. As soon as I went off Wonder Woman, those people a lot of them didn't follow me. They stayed at Wonder Woman, and whoever the next artist on Wonder Woman, that was their new favorite artist, right? And so having a longevity on a character, I think, on a character that people are reading, let me preface that, on a book that people are paying attention to, is valuable, really valuable. And so, yeah, I do enjoy doing different things, but if it's a character I really, really liked, like Captain America, or I would really be intrigued in doing, like a long-term thing on Superman, who I never was a big Superman fan, but I became when I started working on him and did him in some Justice League stuff, and it drew him a little bit and sort of got to understand him. I was like, yeah, I could do this. I could do Superman long-term and have, fun with it. But like I said, that those opportunities rarely present themselves anymore.
So I have to ask, what is next for you?
Well, what I'm working on okay, I'll give you the sad story, the real truth. After I did the dark multiverse thing, I jumped on and did about, 6 or 7 issues of Justice League, right? And the editor on Justice League came after me to do it. So I felt pretty good about my position. I was like, oh, this guy actually wants me to work on the book. It's not me begging, right, to do it. But then, AT&T came in and fired everybody. And that was, a year ago, September. Yeah, so a year and a half ago now, I think, is when that happened. Mm-hmm. And suddenly I had nothing, okay? And everybody that I worked with at DC was gone. I got nervous when Dan DiDio was let go in January, I think it was, of that year. And because Dan and I had a really good working relationship, he's the guy that brought me into DC. He always took care of me and made sure I had something. And so I never spent a great deal of time or energy cultivating relationships with editors and stuff, because I knew, Dan would just say, hey, put Aaron on this, and so I didn't really, I knew the editors I worked with, but I wasn't spending a lot of time networking with the other editors that I wasn't working with. Mm-hmm. And because I knew all the people on top, and I figured, yeah. So, but then those people were gone, Mark Chiarello, and then, Dan DiDio and Mark Chiarello gone, right? So I thought, okay, I'm in trouble. But then this editor comes to me and says, hey, I want you to do Justice League. I'm like, okay. So I'll start cultivating these relationships again, which I did. But then all those guys got canned, right? And they're gone. And I have no, I know Marie Javins, and I'd worked with her before, but, I wasn't getting anywhere with her. And I'm sure she was busy and, being editor in chief, it's like not like being an editor of a monthly book, right? She's not handing out assignments anymore. So then I had all these people, and I was like, that I didn't know. And I hadn't really cultivated any relationships at Marvel for, a decade, because I'd been exclusively working at DC, although I knew a few guys over there, but there was I didn't have any steam going at the time, And even though I had just done some Justice League stuff, it wasn't like I was the regular artist on Justice League. I think Doug Mankey was, and then I came in and did some issues, and then I did a special story arc to give him time to catch up with whatever. And so I wasn't the main guy that I could come in and say, yeah, I'm Justice League artist Aaron Lopresti, you guys give me Spider-Man or whatever, it wasn't like that. So, so I was sitting there saying, I got to go back crawling on my hands and knees in the latter half of my career to a bunch of young editors who have no idea who I am and probably don't care. And I said, that's probably not going to go well. Or I can try and launch an independent book. And that's the direction I decided to go, because to be honest with you, since I was a kid, before I even broke into comics, I was always creating my own stuff. And I mean, that's most creators, not all, but most creators will say, yeah, I've got my own line of comics I would love to do, but where do you get the opportunity, right? And I thought, well, as I'm getting closer and closer to 60, not there yet. I may look it, but I'm not there yet. I was like, how much time do I have to do this stuff, right? If I want to get some of these characters out, if I want to get the Lopresti verse out, I've got to, it's either now or never. So, I decided to go that route, started a YouTube channel so I could cultivate a new audience, a new crowd, and then launched Wraith of God, which is on Indiegogo right now, is in demand and doing fairly well. And I'm working on that book right now. So it's a 78-page graphic novel. I'm on page 52 right now. Should have it done by April, and then hopefully the colorist is only a week behind me and the letter a few days behind them, and they can get it to the printer, and and then go from there and see what I can do next. But it's a Wild West, man. It's a whole new ball game out there when you're doing everything, right? It's like I'm not just handed a script. I'm writing a script, I'm drawing the book, but I'm also publishing the book, I'm promoting the book. I'm, you're doing everything, and it's a lot of work, and I can understand why a lot of people wouldn't want that responsibility, because it is a pain in the butt. If something goes wrong, it's on you, right? So now I have to deal with whatever went wrong, and so far I haven't had any. I've got extra stretch goals that everybody gets, like the trading cards and the sticker set and this stuff. And I've got to, I got to get the artwork done for that and then get it to the printer, and all that stuff has come back and nobody screwed anything up yet. Thank God. Right. So, but if they did, that's a problem I got to solve. And I still got this deadline to meet. Right. So you become the publisher, but also you're also the artist, the creative person who's got to meet the deadline for the publisher. So you're wearing a lot of hats, and it's nothing that I don't like. It's just a lot of work, but it's stuff that, let's say you can hang on till you're 65 before the industry dumps you, or maybe you hang on till you're 70, which is, that's unrealistic, at least in mainstream. Mm-hmm. But let's just, but at some point they're going to dump you and you're done. Right. And, it's like John Byrne famously put on a Facebook page, hey, if they can do this to Jack Kirby and they can do this to me, they can do it to you. And he's right. Look how big John Byrne was, right? Look how big some of these guys were, some of our favorites. And they get aged out. It's just how it happens, right? You get the turnover editorially. You have 20 somethings now editing books, and they want to discover the new talent. They're not interested in what you did 30 years ago or 20 years ago or whatever, right? You're old news. And so at some point, you're going to get dumped, and you either wait until that moment happens, and then what do you do? Right. Or you take an opportunity, which I did. I mean, it was like, I was at a crossroads, and I said, okay, well, I'm going to go this direction, because if I don't do this now, I'm never going to do it. And so, it's going okay so far. So we'll see, it's with crowdfunding, and there's more people and more people and more people doing it. How big is the audience? How much money is there actually out there to be spread out to all these different projects? Can you build an audience and keep it going? Or, is it going to slowly fade? Or, who knows? I mean, it's just like the mainstream industry. Who knows what's going to happen in 6 months, right?
Right.
we've all as creators have been saying, you know, since the 70s, this industry is going to be over in 10 years. We better start thinking about what else we're going to do. I mean, they were saying that in the 70s, and it just keeps finding ways to keep going. So hopefully that'll be the case. But so my monster horror superhero Western Wraith of God is what I am currently working on. And it's taking all of my, my time and my creative energies. And it's an interesting thing because this is the first time I'm inking it myself. And generally that's not a way to go if you want to get something done quickly. But I'm inking it in a way, I've always been a brush inker my entire life. I'm inking it exclusively with pens because I want it to have kind of a rougher, grittier, for lack of a better word, look to it. Okay. Because it's kind of a, you know, I want that kind of spaghetti Western feel. And so I'm not drawing any differently than I normally have, but I am finishing it differently than I would. So the approach to the line work and things like that is different over the top of the pencil drawings than it would be, you know, when I was doing Justice League and doing something really, really super tight. Then Matt Ryan would come in, you know, super tight inks. And this is much, I mean, for me, it's much looser. I mean, I still wouldn't say it's loose because there's a ton of like cross hatching and that type of stuff, but it's a different look for sure. And so it's the first time I'm getting to do my own stuff, but I'm also getting to experiment stylistically as well, which is kind of fun.
That sounds really interesting. And when that comes out, we would love to have you back on to discuss it.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, if schedules permit, you know, for you to do so.
Well, it's funny how it works because when you go into campaign mode and you're not doing a lot of drawing, you're doing guest appearances on people's shows, you're doing your own videos, trying to promote. And then it's the weirdest feeling because I was in that mode for, I think I launched the book in August because I wanted to get it launched in the summer before waiting to get too close to Christmas when people have too many other things they want to spend their money on. And so I got it launched in the summer, but then by October, the campaign was pretty much was closed. I mean, it's in demand still, so it's still open, but technically the active live promotional part of the campaign was over. And then I was like, I got to get this book done, you know? So then you start working, you start figuring out, in my case, since I'd never consistently penciled and inked my own work, other than covers. I did a Batman story that I penciled and inked in Legends of the Dark Knight a few years ago. You know, but other than that, I had not done a bunch of interior work. And so I wasn't really sure how many pages I could produce a week. And what I've fallen into is understanding that I can pencil and ink 3 pages a week. All right. And that's working 6 to 7 days, but that's life. Right. And so, which is really is really like six pages a week normally, because then that's what I penciled was 5 or 6 pages a week, depending on the deadlines and the projects and stuff. But that was kind of where I was at. And so penciling 3 pages, then going back and inking 3 pages, that's a total of 6 pages, right? So that's what I'm getting done a week, which I think is a pretty good clip for that. But you can't spend all your time promoting and doing YouTube videos and stuff like that and live streaming and get the work done. So right. I went from, you know, Sideshow Barker to really intent writer artist. And it's the weirdest thing because I mean, I was on YouTube 4, 5, 6, sometimes 6 days a week, you know, doing videos and, you know, promoting and either on someone else's show or my own show. And then to all of a sudden go, okay, I'm going to do 2 shows a week or whatever. And then I'm drawing full time because you got to do it or you'll never get the book done. And so it's like, take this hat off, put on the creative hat now. The promotional hat is done. And although you still got to try and promote it, but I'm spending, you know, 90% of my time working on the book right now. And so once, I guess my point was, once the book is done, then the next project will be I'll be in promotion mode for that. And I'll be, you know, oh yeah, I got time to do a live stream. Let's do it. You know, you want an interview? Let's do it. You know, because that's all I'll be doing.
All right.
So
where can people see your work or follow you on social, any of that good stuff?
Well, I'm you just have to be able to spell my name, because my Twitter handle is Aaron Lopresti. Facebook, I'm Aaron Lopresti. Instagram, Aaron Lopresti. And I have a YouTube channel under Aaron Lopresti. So,
okay.
And I have a website, aaronlopresti.com. So yeah, if you can spell my name, you can find me.
So there's no other Aaron Lopresti that we have to worry about.
Apparently, well, you know, it's funny. I went on Instagram and there is some other Aaron Loprestis, but for some reason I got the @Aaron Lopresti before anybody else did.
Nice.
So, you know, I'm not like Aaron Lopresti 1, or I have some, you know, old penciler or anything like that. You know, it's just my name. I'm not hiding behind any handles. I am, it's just my name. So, like I said,
perfect.
if you can spell it correctly, it's 2 A's, Aaron, you can find me.
Awesome. Aaron, thank you so much for your time. It's been absolutely a pleasure talking to you.
Well, gentlemen, thank you. I enjoy the opportunity, and I thank you so much for extending the offer to give me the opportunity to do this.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back. How was that interview, right? Interesting guy. I'm looking forward to his new work that he has coming out. The artwork that you saw in the background was his own original work for his new comic. So I'm looking forward to it. It looks really cool.
Yeah, and if you look him up on Facebook, he does Facebook Lives quite often. Very entertaining show. I believe he even uses a puppet once in a while. Just a very fun-loving guy.
Great interview, guys. Sorry I missed out on this one. Aaron sounds like a cool dude and got a lot of good work to look forward to there. As we promised, we are going to continue to read some of our reviews from online, and we encourage you to leave reviews and ratings on Apple Podcasts. Just look for Dollar Bin Bandits. This one was from Mega Brain Comics, our friends there. It's called The Ultimate Comic Fan Podcast. Oren and Joe, I'm sorry you missed me, have created the Inside the Actor Studio of Comic podcast. It's so much fun listening to them chat with the titans of the comic industry. Thank you, Mega Brain, and I'm sure Jean-Michel. So we appreciate it. I think that is an apropos description of the show, Inside the Actor Studio. So, you know, we'll run with that. I don't know which of us is the late, great James Lipton, but maybe all three of us. So that'll do it for this episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits. Please continue to rate, review, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.